So let me do a little bit in terms of background. Dr. Brenda Major holds the rank of Distinguished Professor in the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences and the Department of Communication at the University of California at Santa Barbara. She's a past president of the Society for Experimental Social Psychology and the Society for Personality and Social Psychology. She earned her bachelor's degree from the College of Worcester in Ohio, her master's degree from Miami University of Ohio, and her doctoral degree from Purdue University. She spent her early career at the State University of New York at Buffalo before moving to her current position at the University of California at Santa Barbara. There, she directs the Self and Social Identity Lab, which explores psychological resilience, the personality characteristics, and cognitive, emotional, and behavioral strategies that enable people to maintain their sense of self-esteem and well-being as they cope with prejudice, discrimination, devalued social identities, and stressful life events. Dr. Major has authored over 175 articles and chapters, co-edited 2 books, most recently the Oxford Handbook of Stigma, Discrimination, and Health, published in 2017. Dr. Major has been the recipient of numerous grants and awards supporting and recognizing her work. Notably, she's received not 1, not 2, but 3 Gordon Allport Prizes from the Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issues, SPSP, for her work exploring gender and behavior with Kay Doe, the psychological implications of organizational diversity with Cheryl Kaiser, and perhaps her best-known work, exploring stigma and self-esteem with Jennifer Crocker. She also received the Scientific Impact Award from SESP for that work as well. And in recognition of her scope and magnitude of the contributions that she's made in her work, she's also the very proud recipient of the Kurt Lewin Award from SPSP and the Donald T. Campbell Prize from SPSP. And on a personal note, Brenda, I just wanted to say, one of the reasons that I'm really thrilled to be here is that I, as you know, was one of your students at UCSB, or I was a student at UCSB when you came.
Yeah.
And we were very steeped in the social psychology and the social psychological, sort of the social cognition tradition at that time. And your introduction really opened my eyes to the other side of things, trying to understand the target of discrimination and the ways in which that individual might feel and how it plays out in their interaction. So that really opened my eyes and had a big influence on me personally and my career as well. So it's really a pleasure to be here. So join me in welcoming Dr. Brenda Major.
Thank you. Great job.
Excellent. Okay, so I thought we would get started. So this is going to be a little bit of a time to get a little bit of Brenda's origin story, if you will. So I'm going to talk a bit about your background. So, so you grew up in outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Yes.
Your mom was a homemaker. Your dad was a traveling salesman. You have a sister, and was it an older or younger sister?
2 years older.
2 years older. Okay.
She was the good girl.
She's the good girl. Yeah, we're going to get into that, I think. So I guess I want to know a little bit in terms of so how did you get here? But what did you want to be when you grew up?
That's an interesting question. I think partly because of the times, girls weren't expected to have clear career goals, but if I wanted to be anything, I think it was probably a veterinarian.
Yeah. Oh, excellent.
I like animals.
I can imagine. And so, so I guess another thing is that if you think about it, like when you were in school early on, was education kind of an important part of your family background?
It was very important. It was never questioned that I was going to go to college. Mm-hmm. And my mom in particular is a very strict taskmaster. So she expected us to get good grades. And I remember getting grounded for 6 weeks because I got a C in geometry. Still smarts, years later.
Yeah, what kind of activities were you into in school?
Cheerleading. I was a cheerleader.
A cheerleader, okay. Yeah, but I think at some point you mentioned to me that you also were on the debate team, right?
Yes, I was. Yeah. And never defeated.
Undefeated, yeah. And I don't think anybody would find that a surprise, to be perfectly honest. And so that was high school. So what made you choose the College of Worcester?
That's an interesting question. It was a great school, and it was about 4 hours from home, so that was about the limits that my parents were going to let me go. I actually think that they really encouraged me to go to the College of Worcester because they'd known somebody else who'd sent their son there, and he was having a really hard time. So it was academically rigorous. They had hours for the girls' dorms. They had weekly attendance at chapel required. So I think they thought that if I went there, I would stay out of trouble.
Did it work?
Yes. Well, it was 1968, and within 1 year, there was no more required chapel attendance. There were no curfews on girls' dorms. Oh. That all stopped, after and I can't attribute it to me, so.
Oh, okay, yeah. So it wasn't your fault, but
but it happened, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Things changed, and so again, I guess I wonder, how did you start to find psychology? So were you always thinking about being a psychology major?
No, I mean, we didn't have psychology in high school. I actually started in thinking theater, speech and theater, and then I started taking courses in political science, which I loved. And then I took some courses in psychology, and I Worcester, you had to do a junior honors project and a senior honors project. And I did my junior honors project in political science on Ralph K. White's book, Nobody Wanted War, which is kind of a psychological analysis of the Vietnam War. And, but I was also taking psychology courses, and my advisor, I remember this very vividly, Gordon Shull, because he's in his 90s and he still writes to me, which is very interesting.
Oh, wow.
He advised me that there was likely to be more of a career for me in psychology than there was in political science as a woman.
Oh.
And that's been interesting. So that was that would have been about 1970.
Yeah.
That given the fields, that he thought there was more future there.
Yeah, and so it sounds like that sounds like a supportive comment, right? He's trying to.
I think he meant it to be very supportive, that I would face fewer barriers if I pursued that route.
All right, so then it was psychology. So at that point, so then.
So the senior honors thesis was in psychology.
Yeah. All right, and so were you thinking about graduate school at that time?
No, I wasn't thinking about graduate school. I was. I thought I would get a job in management or something. So the women's movement's just starting, right? It's 1972. The women's movement is beginning. I'm thinking I'm going to get a job in management or something, go into corporate world. And I remember very vividly an interview with the HR director of Frito-Lay, Frito-Lay potato chips, where I interviewed with this man, and I said that I was really interested in going into management. And he said, and I'll never forget it, he said, "Honey, we don't hire women in management. We tried that once and it upset the apple cart too much." So think how things have changed. They have changed in some ways and they haven't changed in others.
Yeah.
Right, but that was sort of very blatant, a sort of very blatant form of discrimination that we wouldn't see today. So I ended up getting a job as a secretary.
Yeah. And then, so how did you find graduate school?
Well, I'm an accidental social psychologist. I got a call in, I think probably the first week of September, from Hank Lois, who was my senior honors advisor. And he said, "Brenda, how do you like your job?" I said, "I hate my job." He said, "Do you want to go to graduate school in 2 weeks at Miami University of Ohio?" So what had happened was that his graduate student who was going to come in and work with him and had a graduate research assistantship had gotten deathly ill and wasn't going to come to grad school. So he had an open position. So that was John Yonke, he was chair of the department. He called Hank Lois and said, "Do you have any promising young people who might like to go to graduate school?" And Hank called me and said, "How do you like your job?" And I said, "I don't. Do you want to go?" So I packed up my belongings. I'd never been to Miami of Ohio. I'd never met John Yonke. And I packed up my belongings and went off to grad school.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that is an accident. It seems accidental.
Seems accidental, yes.
Wow. The little side note, do you know what happened to that student, the person who got ill?
No idea.
Okay.
No idea.
Well, we wish that person well. Absolutely.
I have no idea.
So you started there with John Yonke, you said, and John Yonke is an experimental psychologist. What did he study?
He studied the Ranchburg Effect, which is a obscure memory phenomenon. It's being a 7-digit number. I think it goes, if it's a 7-digit number and one number is repeated twice, you're more likely to forget if it was in the first position than the second position. Something like this. It was like, I think if I'd had to spend my entire graduate career on it, I would not have gone forward. But I took a course from, and I'm blanking on his name, Dick Sherman, my first semester of graduate school at Miami of Ohio in social psychology. And it was incredibly tough. I mean, the students were like practically striking over the class because it was so tough and we had to write a paper every week. And it was incredibly interesting. It was just incredibly interesting to me. So that was really my first encounter with social psychology.
Yeah.
And I took another course with Art Miller on freedom and control that same year, and they were just so interesting that I applied basically to Miami University to switch areas from experimental to social psychology. Okay. And they let me do it. And now, of course, that I'm a faculty member, I realize, can you imagine, our students don't do that very often. They don't come into one area and say, well, I really want to be in a different area, but yeah, I was naive enough not to know that I wasn't supposed to do that. So
yeah,
I just
exactly.
did that. Yeah, so.
And I think, even when they do try to do it, I mean, it leads, there's some hard feelings from the person that they're leaving, and, it can lead to a little bit of complication. That's interesting.
But it was a natural fit. I mean, I love it.
Yeah, and so then, so it sounds like now this is a time where, and you had mentioned it's sort of the late 60s, early 70s, and it's a pretty exciting time in the world in terms of gender
Yes.
dynamics in the United States, things like that. So is that where you started thinking a little bit more about these research interests moving into?
Yeah, one of the things that I was really intrigued by, and I think it's a reflection of, it's very much a reflection of the times. I think if I look at the things that I've studied over my career, they often are linked to social issues of the time. So I had done some research on, there was a young woman at University of Michigan named Bettina Horner who had done her dissertation on something she called women's fear of success, which was really linked to the idea that women anticipated negative consequences of succeeding in men's domains. And they would write about all these negative things that might happen to women who succeeded. So I was really interested in a social psychologist from a social psychological perspective of, wasn't fear of success, it was more linked to the actual domain. So if they succeeded in this domain versus that domain. So I had done some research on that sort of on my own. And I think, again, sort of tied to my own as a woman who was sort of trying to achieve at a time when it was breaking some gender barriers at the time. Yeah. So, and there were no women faculty at Miami University or who were really doing research related to this at all.
Yeah, and so that obviously led to your transition to Purdue, but how did that happen?
Well, the female graduate students, and I was not the initiator of this, basically decided that there was this new emerging field of psychology of gender and psychology of women, and that they wanted to hear from speakers. They wanted to hear from people who were doing that work. So we brought in Beatrice Whiting from Harvard one day, and we brought in Kay Doe from Purdue the second day, who each spoke about their research. And then the students, who were doing related work, we all gave talks about our work. So I heard Kay, and Kay heard me, and there was a party that evening, and we were conversing, and she asked me if I liked things at Miami, and I said, well, there really wasn't somebody that was really doing anything related to my interests. And she said, do you want to come to Purdue and work with me?
Wow.
So I said, yes. So I literally went to 2 graduate schools and didn't apply. So I think that's a really remarkable stroke of luck. And I feel so bad for the students today who are so well prepared, and they're so polished and well prepared, and I kind of feel like the series of falling into it, so.
Yeah, so I mean, seriously, accidental social psychologist.
I'm an accidental social psychologist.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So you're transitioning to Purdue, you're working with Kay Doe, you study sex and gender issues. Again, we talked about it, it's an exciting time. Exciting might be an understatement in the United States in terms of talking about sex and gender. So it sounds like this transition was a great transition. Was it everything you hoped to be?
Yeah, it was a really good transition. Kay was a terrific mentor, tough, but really a terrific mentor for me. And the areas of research that she was looking at, which were the attributions that we make for women's success, what's skill for the man is luck for the woman, and the attributions that women and men make for their own successes. So sort of the bridging of sex and gender and attribution theory. I mean, those are themes that I think have they've underlined a lot of my work through the years. So it was a really great move for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And then. So one thing, I guess we're going to jump a little bit and start to talk about once you left Purdue and started out in the job market, but I noticed your CV. So you were there and you finished with a social psychology PhD, but you also had a consumer psychology degree, a minor.
I did.
So what was that about?
Well, I was hedging my bets.
Yeah.
I think that the academic job market was tough then, just as it is now, and I wasn't sure I'd get an academic job, so I got a minor in consumer psychology as a fallback.
And you didn't actually have to worry about it.
I didn't have to worry about it, but
that's great.
But it was I did it basically to have a secure. It was done as a fallback position.
Yeah. So people, I mean, imagine there are graduate students in the audience that when we say that the job market was tight back then, it's different than now. But I mean, what was the experience like? I mean, it felt tight, right? I mean,
it felt really tight.
Situation.
Yeah. No, it was. That said, it's tighter now, I think, in part because I think you didn't have to have as many publications, certainly, to be considered for a job as it seems that today you do. But it was highly competitive then, it's highly competitive now, and so I wasn't sure I was going to be able to get an academic job, so I was prepared.
Yeah, that's good. And I think a lot of people are being prepared and doing those things. One of the other things I think the grad students have options now, postdocs were probably a lot more
Yes.
common now than they were then, and I think there's a broader sort of acceptance of people going into non-academic routes into other industries and things like that. So it's a broader market now, but yet still probably feels pretty tight because we've got so many students that are being trained. Okay, so then you first job was at the University of Buffalo.
Yep.
Okay, and you were assistant professor there.
I was.
And I guess I want to know a little bit about what it was like to be there at that time.
I would have to say I've been incredibly fortunate because I've been in 2 departments that have been very collegial. Buffalo was a great place to go as an assistant professor because I had senior faculty who were really mentors to me. I mean, the person who stands out for me is Dean Pruitt. And Dean Pruitt was and is, an expert in the area of negotiation and peace psychology. I mean, he's a Quaker, and he's was really into negotiation and peace and conflict resolution. And when I came there, I remember there was one lab, and here I was trying to just run a lab, and here he is, the most senior guy in the department, and he's got a lab, and I'm trying to use that space, and he's trying to use that space, and he could have responded to that in multiple ways. I mean, what he did is he went, to the administration that said, we've got to have another lab space. We have this young scholar, and she needs a lab, and she needs to do it. So he basically, created a situation where there, rather than competition, he made things, really helpful. I remember I didn't have any money, and I was doing early research on entitlement, women's and men's sense of entitlement to pay. And so I needed money for my research, and he had a slush fund, and he said, here, use this research. And he read a lot of my early papers and made comments on them. So I really felt like I had a senior mentor. And I would say for junior faculty, if there's somebody on your faculty who will serve that role for you. It was wonderful. I mean, it was, I think, really helpful.
And you also mentioned Barbara Bunker was there?
Barbara Bunker was there, and they also it was a sort of, I came into a program where they wanted me to succeed and created that sense that we can help you succeed. So it was a great program. And then and Dean Pruitt was really remarkable, I would say, in hiring, and we built a really remarkable social psychology program there. Steve Spencer and Jenny Crocker and Phil Shaver and
you mentioned Lynn
Nancy
Cooper.
Collins and Lynn Cooper, and these were all colleagues at Buffalo that we hired. Pretty remarkable. A whole host of us have been president of SPSP.
That's right, Lynn Cooper, currently the president of SPSP.
Exactly.
This kind of begs the question. And so you're in this incredible environment. It's a great time of growth, the faculty, and again, a number of recognizable names, at least for us who are students of the game. So at some point, you decided to leave all that. You decided to go to UCSB. So I guess I wanted to know, to what extent, what were you thinking about in terms of that transition? Was it a difficult transition? The departments are really different. So as we talked about before, UCSB is kind of a strong social cognition focus.
You mean UCSB?
Oh, sorry, yes, UCSB. Strong social cognition focus. Buffalo is very different. So what was that transition like for you?
It was hard.
Yeah.
It was hard. It was a hard transition. One of the things that happened at Buffalo was we, in a sense, got raided. We literally got raided. Jenny went to Michigan, Lynn went to Missouri, Steve went to Hope and then to Waterloo. Jim and I got offered jobs at UCSB. So the program that we had built in 1 year, all these different faculty got offered other jobs. So it was a kind of like which one of us is going to be first? And if one goes, all go. So it was a tough time, I think. And if none of us had been going to leave, I don't know whether we would have made that move. But the transition to Santa Barbara was, great geographically. But it was hard for me originally because I felt a little bit like a fish out of water.
Yeah, so you sort of talked about this idea that, again, a lot of the colleagues that you had then, you were collaborating with all these individuals, had grants with them, and you moved to UCSB, and again, collegial department, but people don't speak your language, so to speak. So yeah, I can imagine that would have been a difficult transition.
It was, but you stay a place long enough, you get them to speak your language too.
Yeah,
I changed and they changed. I think we all changed.
And again, from my perspective, the program was great, it was fantastic, but that added a perspective in terms of thinking a little bit more broadly about some of the other elements of social psychology, particularly the target perspective, and then again with Jim with the methodological approach with the psychophysiological stuff, and then later on the VR stuff. It really did start to broaden the program. So I think obviously yes, we benefited from it.
But it was mutually beneficial, I think.
Absolutely.
For me too.
Okay.
I mean, so UCSB has had, when I got there, really heavy emphasis on mechanism, and it still does, and it still does. And I just think that, it really is the case that making a move mid-career, I think, was really good for me. I mean, I was very comfortable, very happy and productive at Buffalo, and I loved that program. But the shake-up in the terms of new colleagues and new perspectives, and it's good to make a move, I think, in your career.
Yeah, but
as hard as it is, it's really good.
That's great. And so I want to go back to Buffalo real quickly because, I think to talk a bit about this idea, this theme that seems to carry through a lot of your research, and it's this idea of collaboration. So I want to spend some time talking about that a little bit later, but one of the first kind of notable collaborative relationships that you've had is with Jenny Trocker, when you were at Buffalo.
Yeah.
And so I guess I wanted to know a little bit about how that gets started, and how did you guys start thinking about that project with respect to attributional ambiguity?
It's always hard to retrace exactly where an idea comes from. I had been interested in physical attractiveness and the sort of psychological implications of appearance and how your physical attractiveness, your physical appearance affects your personality and your social interactions. And I had done a study, actually based on another study by Seagal and McKella, where they had done this blinds up, blinds down procedure, which I thought would be really interesting to think of from a physical attractiveness point of view. That for highly attractive women, if they get praise on their work from men, and they know that their appearance is a potential alternative explanation for that praise, then they internalize it. Do they then come to feel that same sense of competence that they would if they didn't think their appearance, might have contributed it? So I was really thinking of attributional ambiguity, although I don't think I used that term at the time, from the sort of positive side of for women, of to what extent does appearance or the idea of ulterior motives from men get in the way of them internalizing their own successes. And it was Jenny who really thought about, she had been doing some work on stigma, about thinking about that from this perspective of to what extent could stigma and prejudice be an alternative explanation that people might entertain for why they might face rejection. And to what extent could, understanding that prejudice and discrimination might have caused a setback, protect your self-esteem from thinking it was your own fault, from thinking that it was something you had done. So she sort of brought that attribution perspective, based partly on that, and then I had been doing work on something that Faye Crosby had called the paradox of the contented female worker, which was this finding that even though women were being paid less than men with similar qualifications, they would report nonetheless being just as satisfied with their pay as men. And so one speculation was that, women didn't care about money as much as men did. And I said, I think there's another possibility, which is that women are comparing their wages against other women. And so if you're comparing within your in-group, what you're getting seems, if librarians compare with librarians, not with accountants or whatever, you're comparing within and the job market, of course, is highly sex segregated. So women compare with women, and with women's jobs, you're going to be having a different standard of comparison. So once we started thinking about attributional ambiguity, and then we expanded it to think about how the kind of social comparisons that you might make if you're a member of a stigmatized or disadvantaged group might also protect your self-esteem. And then we started thinking about sort of the way you could selectively value or devalue different attributes or skills, and how so it broadened. And it was a real collaborative, really fun collaboration, and very productive.
Yeah, and incredibly fun. And I think, some other thing that you've sort of mentioned in the past is that idea that, again, when you collaborate with other people, you try to look for things in those collaborations that are going to be beneficial. But what's your perspective on collaboration? How do you decide who you're going to collaborate? How do these things tend to happen? Is there any uniformity or consistency to it?
That's an interesting question. I think it's I would say one of my problems is lack of focus. I love to work with people who are disciplined and focused, and Jenny is all of that, so, she is on task. So I sort of might be going around like this, but if I look at my collaborators, they're often much more analytical and disciplined than I am, and I benefit greatly from that. I really do. I think, but also fun. I mean, people who are like ideas, like to play with ideas. So.
Yeah, and fun, I think, is incredibly important.
Yeah. But so I think of my students and my collaborators and my postdocs as my intellectual playmates. Yeah, so we're like intellectual playmates. It's kind of fun.
So, I mean, I guess, one thing, so Jenny brings the discipline to you. What do you think you bring to her?
I would say, at different points in your career, I would say my best skill is integrative. I think I'm a really good integrative thinker. I read widely and I think about how this links to that and that links to this. So some of us we think linearly, and I think other people are really good at thinking integratively, and I think that's probably my skill.
Yeah, that's great. And I think the other thing is when you look across the number of topics that you've studied, so weight stigma, attributional ambiguity with respect to racial and ethnic stigma, some consequences of abortions. A lot of those things are really topical. So in terms of that sort of integrative approach, it sounds like you get your research ideas from like what's going on in the world. What are the social issues that are affecting people?
I do.
So it's not probably not a big assumption, but so where do again some of these ideas come from?
The world.
Yeah, just from the world and your experience.
I mean, I think that what's so wonderful about social psychology is we have these wonderful theories and we have these wonderful methods. And I like to think about social problems or social issues, whether it be, so for example, the work that I've been doing on weight stigma, for example, with Jeff Hunger and Carol Miller, a lot of that came from watching the news and saying, the obesity epidemic and look at this, these heavy people are costing us all this money and the sickening of America and sort of all this stuff if they would just lose weight, and thinking, this, as somebody who struggled with my weight my whole life, I'm thinking, it doesn't make me become better able to be a thinner person. It makes me want to go out and eat a donut. It's like, I don't know, it's like that this isn't working. So thinking like a social psychologist, what's going on here? What are we doing? So a lot of times it's thinking how do our theories and our methods and what we know as social psychologists, what do they bring to bear? And how can we understand this phenomena?
Yeah.
Looking at the changing ethnic diversity in the United States and watching that and what are its implications, for example, for voting and for the presidential election or diversity programs and how they might be perceived by whites and minorities and sort of thinking about those and what would our theories say about that and how can we test it, so yeah.
Yeah, and yesterday's presidential symposium, I didn't get a chance to attend, I'll just out myself now, but it was, what can social psychology do and social personality psychology contribute in the age of Trump? And it's ironic because when you were an SPSP president in 2006, there was a very similar symposium that you put together that was something about the red-blue divide in politics, and seems like we're right back there. I guess I wonder, so maybe just thinking back to that time, what were your goals with that symposium? And how do you think things have changed, if at all?
Well, I was really struck. So I went back to that presidential symposium and my opening words, that was 12 years ago. And I challenged us as a field to look more closely at what the issues were on the right and what the issues were on the left, because otherwise we were going to become extremely polarized and just this kind of outcome was going to happen. So that this sort of demonization of people who have differences of opinions so what I had people speak on identity, basically ideology and religion as the sort of three big things that we know a lot about as social psychologists, and how each of those could be contributing to this divide, and how we needed to think about ways to bridge it or the country was going to become more polarized. And do I think that that a lot of us could probably have foreseen this, but I think a lot of that has come to pass, that we've become more polarized even.
Yeah, absolutely so. And so, do you feel that the field was responsive to that symposium?
No, not particularly, no.
Because it feels like we were blindsided again in 2016.
Yeah, people are going shocked that Trump was elected, but actually I was watching the way that Hillary Clinton was running her campaign, and I thought there was a good chance that Trump was going to get elected.
Yeah, in fact, you actually, you wrote about this, right, recently?
We published a paper during the primaries on white identity threat and how that was, and the increasing concerns about diversity with Allie Blodorn and my son. We published a paper basically showing that, reminding whites that the country was becoming more ethnically diverse, which Hillary Clinton made a point of constantly, that reminder made whites who are highly identified with their ethnic groups to be more likely to say they felt positively towards Trump, to be more anti-immigration, to be more anti-PC, and to feel basically, and the thing that was really frightening about that was true for both Republicans and Democrats. It was not moderated by that. The sort of pushing that, so these reminders that the threat, and so that not recognizing that, in a sense, that how this could cut both ways. So I think that we published that before the election, and on this unreasonable hope that it might make a difference, but it didn't.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny because, so again, back in 2006, talking about the red-blue divide, and some of at least the observations that you had then, is that the field, being a fairly liberal field in our perspectives, we sort of caught off guard, and that we would use our empirical, basically approaches and power to try to understand that divide and to try to do something to help to bridge it. And as you suggested, we're not really doing it. So what's getting in the way, and what do you think we need to do to go forward?
Oh boy, I don't know. I think that it's a really good question. That wasn't on the list.
I know.
It's a really good question. I mean, I have always believed that in studying research topics, and my students will tell you this, that I think we have to try to set our ideological blinders aside, and we have to look really hard at the issue, and we need to be willing to ask the tough questions, and we need to be willing to find answers that maybe we didn't want to see. And I think sometimes we're not.
Yeah. I'm not sure what that's going to change.
Yeah.
I'm optimistic, though, and I hope everyone else is, too. I guess I wanted to talk a little bit about another collaborative relationship that you've had that's lasted about 35 years.
Closer to 40.
Closer to 40, yeah. And so that's with Jim Blaskovich, who I think is in the audience. Yeah, there he is.
He's out there.
So Jim is your spouse. He's another academic psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
You guys have, again, been married for 35 years. You've got 2 children, Meredith and Gregory, I believe.
And Beth.
Right,
Yes.
Okay. And, oh yeah, that's right. And I guess I want to know a little bit for sort of many of us who are sort of challenged with the balance between work and family, like how have you made that particular collaborative relationship work out so well?
Well, we're both social psychologists. We actually met at an SPSP executive committee meeting. How cool is that? This society brought us together.
Nice.
I think that's pretty cool. We're both social psychologists. I think and what that has done, I think, is we share a lot of the same values. We celebrate getting something into JPSP. We know what that means. That's so cool. So we go to the same conventions. I think that the overlap in our lives has been a real asset, actually, I think, over the years. And so that's been cool. And I think we support each other. We don't compete with each other. We're proud of each other's accomplishments, so that's been kind of nice too. So yeah. I think that's another positive, this is not an easy relationship, but it's a good one.
You can edit that out. So, I'm actually, so again, sort of speaking in terms of challenges, so one of those challenges, so again, you've had transitions, right? You've moved
Yes.
from different places. Yes. And so how do you make a decision about, the two of you, about whether or not it's a good idea to go, not a good idea to go? Well,
I think like any relationship, you got to have trade-offs. Yeah. Jim came to Buffalo for me, and the final decision in the move to UCSB was his.
Oh, yeah?
And it was my turn. So it was my turn.
It was your turn.
We did some turn taking, yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's interesting. We moved away from your research. I want to go back to it a little bit. Okay. And so I want to know a little bit about what you're working on now. So things that, that you're excited about. And one of the things that you had mentioned to me in the past was this concept of skin deep resilience.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, this is something that I'm doing with Tessa Dover, who's out there, I think, perhaps there she is, who's now at Portland State. So this is actually, one of the ways that my work has evolved is we started out looking at stigma and self-esteem, and then I started becoming increasingly interested in the impact of stigma on health and physiological outcomes. And And also, what are the ways in which we cope, and how do we cope with stigma, but also the way our beliefs, so the system justifying beliefs like that hard work leads to success and members of any group can get ahead in America, these beliefs that the world is a fair place and if I work hard I can get ahead. So looking at how those beliefs are linked to persistence and striving among members of minority groups. There's a lot of interesting work to suggest that these beliefs are a double-edged sword for members of minority groups, because on the one hand, if you believe that the world is fair and if I work hard, I can get ahead no matter who I am, that it provides a source of inspiration and hope and motivation. On the other hand, they also are system justifying in that they also imply that people who haven't succeeded, who aren't at the top, there must be something wrong with them. Yeah. That there must, maybe they don't try hard enough, or they're lazy, or they're not as competent. So these beliefs, if you believe them, on the one hand, they're a source of inspiration. On the other hand, if you believe them, they're a potential source of, low self-esteem and feeling bad. And so I've always been interested in the interplay of those two beliefs and the ways in which they're beneficial and the ways in which they're not. And Edith Chen and Greg Miller have recently been doing this work on this really fascinating concept called skin-deep resilience, which is the idea that there are personality factors like conscientiousness and a sense of personal control that are related to all sorts of positive outcomes, like good school performance, reduced behavioral problems, better psychological well-being. So you find these strong main effects of these things like conscientiousness and control, and all these positive outcomes. But what they found now across a series of studies is that for African Americans from disadvantaged backgrounds who are poor, so people who are doubly disadvantaged, they are both minority and they are of low SES. For those students, that conscientiousness and control, they are associated with better psychological outcomes and behavioral outcomes, but a poorer physiological profile. They have shorter telomeres, they're more likely to get sick if they're infected with a virus, they're showing, higher levels of allostatic load. So these kids who are really disadvantaged but are striving and look so good on all of our measures of psychological outcomes are looking really bad on these measures of physiological outcomes. So this is what they've coined this term skin-deep resilience. So this striving in the face of really severe adversity and how it may be taking this toll on your body. So we've been interested in taking those constructs and putting this idea about these beliefs about fairness together with encountering discrimination. So we know that if you encounter discrimination, that you perceive yourself to be a victim of discrimination, it has a whole host of negative outcomes. And what we've been looking at is how the belief that the system is fair may interact with the perceptions of discrimination to affect physiological as well as psychological outcomes. So if you don't feel like you encounter much discrimination, and you're a member of a minority, believing that the system is fair is associated with positive psychological well-being and good outcomes. But if you believe the system is fair and you encounter discrimination, it's associated with these poor physiological outcomes. So we've been looking, basically going from the personality variables and the sort of disadvantage that Edith and Greg have been studying and looking at it with regard to perceived discrimination and our beliefs about the world and how they intersect to produce a very similar phenomena of skin-deep resilience. So that's something we've been really interested in. We're following over time low SES first-generation Latino students to college and looking over time at factors that predict both psychological well-being and behavioral outcomes as well as physiological outcomes, and tracking beliefs like this and discrimination over time. And so it's a really rich data set, and I'm really excited about it.
Interesting, and it also sounds like it's really a combination of a lot of different things that you've looked at in the past, right?
Oh, yeah.
So in terms of attributional ambiguity and the implications for self-esteem.
Oh, and there's a whole weight stigma component in there too.
Yeah,
yes.
Exactly, and the perceptions of fairness, right, and diversity structures. So.
And these belief systems, which I've been interested in for a really long time.
Yeah.
How these belief systems can both, buffer you and put you at risk in the circumstances under which they do.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Very interesting. We're looking forward to hearing more. We're almost out of time, or at least we're going to wrap up, but I wanted to spend a little bit of time doing something that I think is going to be a little bit of fun. So it's going to be a lightning round. And in the first part of the lightning round, we want to know a little bit about you personally, so about your leisure activity. So I'm just going to ask you a series of questions. Just tell me the first thing that comes to mind. Okay? Some of these you may have heard before, some not.
Oh, good. Oh,
Okay.
geez.
All right.
Here we go.
Favorite author?
Oh, Margaret Atwood.
Margaret Atwood. Okay. Favorite book?
I like the Harry Potter series.
That's good. That's a contrast, but it's good.
Well, I could add other ones. The Handmaid's Tale. I really love The Handmaid's Tale too. Well, I only get one though, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, exactly. Okay. Favorite food?
Chocolate.
Favorite sports team?
The Buffalo Bills. Absolutely.
Yeah. As a person who's a New England Patriots fan, I lament.
Yes.
But that's okay. Okay. Favorite female actor?
Oh, Meryl Streep. I would say Meryl Streep.
Meryl Streep is good. What I think is good is irrelevant. Forgive my little ad libs there. Favorite male actor?
Tom Hanks.
Favorite TV show?
Oh, Fixer Upper.
Fixer Upper. That's funny. I was on the treadmill this morning and there was a Fixer Upper marathon on the screen in front of me.
Oh, I missed it.
I know. I'm sure it'll be back. I'm sure. Oh no, I want to know. I'm sorry. It was the last show you binged watched.
Oh, The Sopranos.
The Sopranos.
The Sopranos.
Excellent. Okay. Favorite vacation destination?
Any place on water.
Places with water.
Yeah, I like water.
Favorite word?
Favorite word? Probably hope.
Okay. Least favorite word?
Contempt.
Here we go. Dogs or cats?
Dogs.
Oh, easy.
Easily. As anybody who knows me, I usually have a dog by my side.
All right. Beer or wine?
Wine.
Apple or Android?
Oh, I can't decide. I have both. And I'm on the fence.
GIF or GIF?
I don't know. I don't know what it is.
You're not alone, to be perfectly honest. Okay. Star Trek or Star Wars?
Neither.
All right. Okay, now I want to ask you a few that are on the professional realm. Okay, so favorite social personality psychologist?
Claude Steele.
That's a good one.
Claude Steele.
I think I agree, actually.
Yeah.
Favorite psychological concept?
Social identity threat.
That makes sense.
So it's like something that's studied a lot.
Okay. SPSS or R?
SPSS.
Okay.
I haven't learned R. It's a generational thing.
It's a generational thing. That's why we have graduate students, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. JPSP or SPPS?
Well, it's JPSP, but I feel like I should say SPPS here, but it's JPSP.
That makes sense. All right, last one. Social psychologist or social psychological scientist?
Oh, I would describe myself as a social personality psychologist.
Social personality psychologist.
Yeah.
That's a good addendum. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, I think we're going to end up here. Brenda, thank you so much. It's been a delight. I wanted to just say, I know you describe yourself as an accidental social psychologist, but it's really a happy accident, right? It's a happy accident for the field. The people who are here, your collaborators, people that know you and have gotten to know you over the years, are incredibly, vitalized by the work that you do and by your energy that you bring to the work and what you bring to these meetings. And we really, really appreciate that. So you're a happy accident for the field of social psychology. And of course, we have benefited a lot from the theories and perspectives that you and all your collaborators have brought in terms of the research that you do. And then again, the idea that research, it really energizes generations of people afterward. It's created a series of seminal articles, must-read articles that really have had a lot of impact on the kinds of directions that people have taken in their own research and probably their own personal lives as well. So we want to thank you for all the work that you've done, and I want to ask you guys to thank Brenda for spending some time with us out of the lab.